የሚንሸራሸርበት ቤት። በሐሳብ ገበታችን ወቅታዊ፣ ማህበራዊ፣ ፖለቲካዊ እንዲሁም የህግ ጉዳዮች በስፋት በጥልቀትና በአካታችነት ይቀርባሉ። የሳምንቱ እንግዳም የሳምንቱ በተጋባዥ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች፣ ፖለቲከኞች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች የሚቀርቡበት ፕሮግራም ወቅታዊ ጉዳይ፣ ወቅታዊ ሀገራዊ ጉዳዮች የሚዳሰሱበት ዝግጅት፣ የውይይትና የክርክር መድረክ፣ በተለያየ ጎራ የሚገኙ ታላላቅ ፖለቲከኞች፣ የማህበረሰብ አንቂዎች እንዲሁም ሙያተኞች በሐሳብ ዙሪያ ፊት ለፊት የሚወያዩበት ከዛም አልፎ የሚሟገቱበት ፕሮግራም፣ ህዝባዊ መድረክ፣ የተለያዩ ጉዳዮች ላይ ሁሉም የሐሳብ ገበታ ቤተሰቦች በቀጥታ ሐሳባቸውን የሚያቀርቡበትና ተሳታፊ የሚሆኑበት ለቤተሰቦቻችን እድል የምንሰጥበት ጊዜም። እነዚህና ሌሎች ሳምንታዊ ፕሮግራሞችን ለእናንተ እናቀርባለን። ይህንን የተወደደ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ ቤተሰብ ይሁኑ። በስፋት ተደራሽ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ያጋሩም። የሐሳብ ገበታው እንዲጠናከር በተሻለ ጥራትና ስፋት ወደ እናንተ እንዲደርስ በሐሳቦ በሙያውና በገንዘቦ ይደግፉን። የሐሳብ ገበታን በሱፐር ቻት፣ በሱፐር ታንክስና በሱፐር ስቲከር አጋርነቱን ያሳዩን። በጎፈንድሚ አማራጭ የሐሳብ ገበታን ያበረታቱ። ስለ ሐሳብ አስተያየቶ እንዲሁም ድጋፎም እናመሰግናለን። ዓላማችን የሐሳብ ማህበረሰብ መፍጠር ነው። የሐሳብ ገበታም
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is our Ethiopia Today special podcast. Today I'm going to talk to a very special guest who has an extensive experience on the issues we are talking about. He is Ambassador Tibor Nagy, who has been involved in the Ethiopian politics in so many different capacities. I'm going to introduce him briefly. Ambassador Nagy recently served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs from 2018 until 2021, which means he was in Ethiopia, or he was actively involved in the diplomatic service during the outbreak of the war in the northern part of Ethiopia. And also he is emeritus professor at Texas Tech University, where he also got his master's in 1970s, I think. And Ambassador Nagy arrived in the United States in 1957 as a political refugee from Hungary, Budapest. So I am sitting now in Vienna, a couple of 100 miles from Budapest. The world is quite small. And before that, he has served for more than 32 years as a U.S. government service, including over 20 years in Africa at 8 different postings, which included the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia from 1999 to 2002, following right after his ambassadorship to Guinea from 1996 to 1999. Apart from that, he served as a deputy chief of mission in Nigeria from 1993 until 1995, Cameroon from 1990 to 1993, and even Togo from 1987 to 1990. His other assignments included Zambia, the Seychelles, and an initial tour in Ethiopia. So these are just some of the glimpses of his extensive experience, both in academia and in diplomatic services. Welcome, sir, and I'm so grateful for your flexibility and accommodation of our time difference.
Thank you very, very much. It's a great time to be with you, given all of the events that are going on.
Yeah, there is a lot going on, Mr. Ambassador, and we have a very limited time, and I will focus on some of the issues. The Horn of Africa is going from one crisis to another crisis. It would be an oxymoron if I say the Horn of Africa is in crisis. It's just another layer of crisis. Even the peace plan, which was somehow carved out with the help of the United States and other friendly nations. I'm referring to the Pretoria Agreement. Somehow it held for quite some time, but it has become so difficult. It turned out to be the difficult task for the U.S. ambassadors these days is to save the TPLF leadership from the TPLF themselves. And there is another war which is raging in the northern part of Ethiopia, which is the Amhara region. Of course, even during the northern war, the Amhara and Afar regions were devastated by the war. And And beyond that, we also have some other political crises in the south and the southwestern part of Ethiopia, particularly in Oromia. The good news is that yesterday we have seen the release of 7 high-ranking OLF, or Oromo Liberation Front officers. With that, let me start with a very basic question. That you are deeply involved with the Ethiopian people, I would rather say. And some people are accusing you of being a pro-regime, pro-Abiy, and they're saying that you are biased against other ethnicities or groups. And what is your reflection on that? Let's start with that.
Yeah, let's start with that. What is true is that I'm very pro-Ethiopia. Of all my tours that you mentioned, I think Ethiopia was the most special. And I just have extreme amount of respect and admiration for Ethiopia as a nation, as history and its culture. And it's interesting that, I get accused of everything. During the Northern War, when I was still Assistant Secretary, I was accused of promoting, quote unquote, Tigray genocide. I was also accused of promoting, quote unquote, the TPLF terrorists all at the same time. So, it goes with the territory. With Ethiopia, all you have to do is on social media mention the word Ethiopia, and you will immediately get thousands of people criticizing you because they're the ones that project the thoughts that are in your mind. So, here's the deal. When I was a diplomat, I was very restricted in what I could say and do. As I have said, before, ambassadors and even assistant secretaries of state can recommend policy, but at the end of the day, policy is made by the White House and the Secretary of State, and then they can implement policy, but they don't make it up. But then once you retire, you have the full faith and privileges of every citizen of the United States for freedom of speech, and that's what I have been exercising since then.
That's great, because I saw quite a few of your tweets or engagement on Twitter, and one of which is for me, which is striking, is where you in a way celebrated your Labor Day just a week ago with Ethiopian cuisine. Yeah. And it is so beautiful to see such a message where you still engage in cultural diplomacy, or maintaining your relationship with the people, irrespective of the regime in power or whatever is happening on the political front. That said, you have been in Ethiopia at least since more than 20 years now. At least in the early 2000s, you were there. And now
I was also there during 1984, 1986.
Oh, goodness.
During the Derg. That was my first
Even during
time.
the Derg.
Yeah.
So at the time when we were having a difficulty, where the famine was one of the dark moments in the Ethiopian political history. So I can characterize the Ethiopian political landscape today in terms of extreme polarization, political polarization, and a growing societal fragmentation. These are two key aspects. Were you expecting this in retrospect 20 years ago, that this is coming? Are there some structural fault lines which would inevitably lead to what we are seeing today?
No, 20 years ago, when I left Ethiopia, I was actually quite optimistic, because I thought that Ethiopia would be undergoing a period of very rapid economic growth, and maybe even approaching middle income status fairly quickly. And even as recently as, say, 2018, 2019, people were not just looking at Ethiopia, but also at the Horn of Africa as a very optimistic region. I remember when the Sudanese first revolution happened and Bashir came crashing down due to the people of Sudan, all of a sudden we were talking about not the Horn of Africa, but the Hope of Africa. And unfortunately, how quickly that changed and how quickly that deteriorated. It is absolutely tragic.
One of the issues, one of the fault lines, which is on the the front burner of every active Ethiopian, and those who are familiar with Ethiopian politics, is the politicization of ethnic diversity. So we can call it ethnopolitics or the I could say somehow an institutionalization of ethnic politics. What would you say on that?
Yeah, it's, as we say in the United States, looking backwards is always 100%. And I remember, again, when I went back to Ethiopia the second time in 1999, the whole issue of ethnic federalism was still at an experimental stage, because the people who put it together, thought that might be a successful way to go. Unfortunately, as it turns out, it was not. As you well know, where you are, ethnic federalism works great when the state is very, very wealthy, like Switzerland. When you talk about, you can put ethnic groups together that have historical hatred for each other in Switzerland, and they get along great because they're dividing riches. Whereas in Ethiopia, you put ethnic states together and they're dividing poverty, not riches. So that means that they're fighting each other, over whatever the spoils are. So it turned out to be a historical mistake, but who would have known at the time?
Yeah, there have been some red flags anyways, and still after 30 years of experimentation or flirtation with the ethnic time bomb, it seems that the vast majority of the elites are not learning from the most recent history, and the things are only going from bad to worse, because that's why we are having nationalism, ethnic nationalism, within the Amhara community, which they were considered to be a pan-Ethiopianist in the past, and that. And then if the Amharas are flirting with ethnic nationalism and even militarism, a militant nationalism, and even the Gragi people, the most dispersed community in the country, are seeking regional autonomy of their own. And that tells you that there is a problem in the design of the political orders itself.
Absolutely. And that is one of the huge issues facing Ethiopia right now, that it's going to have to be resolved one way or the other. I compare Ethiopia at the current stage to an airplane that's in the air. The engine was on fire. The big fire has been put out. Now it's a little fire, but there's huge mechanical problems, and the leadership is trying to fix the airplane on its way to a landing. And now with the Horn of Africa, there's a danger that some of those outside the airplane may try shooting at it. So it's an extremely critical situation.
Indeed. So let's move to another issues on which you have been reflecting and which is still topical. I'm referring to hydropolitics and the scramble for hegemony within the Horn of Africa, particularly over the Blue Nile, and especially Egypt, following the commencement of the construction of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or colloquially GERD. Egypt has always been showing persistently that, one, they cannot negotiate on their historic claim. Two, they think that any project on the upstream countries will affect their national interest. And third, they will take any measure to defend their rights. These are the patterns, because I was doing my own research over the last 3 years. And since 2019, actually, they submitted around 5 letters to the UN Security Council with exactly the same templates that I was telling you. And why are the Egyptians are that much concerned about a developmental project, about the electric hydropower, which is within the Ethiopian sovereign jurisdiction, and which doesn't have that much adverse effects?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think Egypt has a major problem with historical arrogance. Once upon a time, when Egypt was powerful and the littoral states were not. They were weak. Egypt could muscle its way to anything it wanted. That equation has changed dramatically. I would say that now, if you look at strength of various, factors, I would say Ethiopia is at least equal, if not superior, to Egypt. And the Egyptians just have to get over that historical fact that you have a country, and as I've said this before, that does not put one drop of water into one of the major rivers, but it feels like it has absolute rights to total 100% control and decision on what to do with that major river. I'm sorry, they are absolutely wrong, and they need to have a major change in attitude. And if they change their attitude, I think they would have much more success in their negotiations. The two sides, Ethiopia and Egypt, they've been coming at this issue, I think, in their negotiating strategy totally differently. The Ethiopians, as I have found happen so many times, are coming at it from the technical points of view. Their negotiations are based on technical data. The Egyptians are coming at it from a political point of view. And the examples you cited is whenever they're unhappy about something, they try to use political leverage and heated words to get their point of view. It's almost like a bully. And, when a bully is challenged, then usually they crumble. And, Egypt can threaten, they can rattle their sabers, but at the end of the day, the dam belongs to Ethiopia. And as I have said from the very beginning, the dam is going to be filled up. So the faster Egypt recognizes that and has an open and flexible policy, the faster that there's going to be a successful resolution to the entire issue.
That's great. There is a famous saying that if history is to rule today, Rome and Athens should be the superpowers.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you look back in history, and I think Egypt has tried at least two times, to attack Ethiopia, and both those times ended in unmitigated disaster for Egypt. So, there's not going to be a military solution. What are they going to do there? Let's be realistic. Egypt needs to get real, get pragmatic, and get flexible, and then I think you will have a successful outcome. But trying all these little side doors, back doors, political, pressures, things like that. I know Ethiopia. I mean, no one can really know Ethiopia. I know a little bit about Ethiopia, but Ethiopia, the more pressure you put on them, the tougher they get. If you want Ethiopia to do something, you tell them they have to do something else. So no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, in a sense, even those people who are against the regime, including myself to some extent, is that whenever you poke them, you are just waking up a resting line. So then there is another important point you have made, Mr. Ambassador, in relation to the completion of the GERD itself. Now, isn't it a fait accompli already? And why are they not getting to their sense now, coming to reality?
It is a fait accompli, and you have to ask the Egyptians why they're not getting to the reality. History can be a very positive force, or it could be a real burden and an albatross around somebody's neck. And I fear that this whole water issue is an albatross around Egypt's neck, that they just have to take the albatross off and realize that it's a new world.
Right, in a different world. Then we'll, of course, come back to this issue because there is an Egyptian factor in the ongoing crisis between Ethiopia and Somalia. We'll get back to it in one way or another. But before that, just one more question. So what is the best way out of this quagmire? It's not even a quagmire for me, and we already said it's a fait accompli. But if there is an equitable and reasonable utilization of the Blue Nile, and with the changing circumstance, which has already changed for good, what would be the best formula for these two countries in particular, but in general for the repairing countries?
Well, I think the best formula would be for Ethiopia to continue doing exactly what it's doing, but leave the door open and say, anytime you want to have a serious discussion, let's sit down and let's hammer out an agreement which is a win-win for everybody, because it's it's totally possible. And I think the formula was there, but at the end of the day, the Egyptians kept thinking that they have the upper hand. And as I said, when you don't put one drop, one atom of water into the Nile, then you have to accept the fact that the people in whose countries the rain is falling have just as much rights to this discussion, if not more so, than you do.
Yeah, it just reminds me of my child, everybody's child, is that when you threaten your own mom that you are not going to do it, and then just only to come back, she is the provider of the bread. Right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let me get you back. Our discussion will be back in the forest, as I said. Let me take you back to the 2018, 2019, during the that hopeful moment where we all saw that there is a transition and Ethiopia is finally getting into something different. A different era was dawning. And what is your view? Can you say that the change or revolution was hijacked, as some people claim, or it was curtailed in the process, or there was no change to begin with?
I think the change was absolutely genuine to begin with. I think the road that Ethiopia set off on back in 2018, 2019 was absolutely a successful way to go. Then you can question to say, okay, were the political decisions and moves that the Ethiopian government made at the time, were they wise? Were they too quick? Was it trying to force the issue? And historians, you're an academician yourself. Historians are going to have a field day, analyzing, writing papers, doing research on that. But it is just tragic as to how such an optimistic course ended up in such a devastating way.
Well, the devil is in the details, as they say. But then let's move then to one of the very unfortunate moment, I would say, of the transition. What is the war, the civil war in the northern part of Ethiopia, what they call the Tigray war. Were you expecting that the confrontation was inevitable as a diplomat? Because diplomats are usually in a better position to sniff out somehow, to make sense of what is coming. So,
no, not
were
at
you
all.
expecting?
No, remember at that time when that happened, when the war actually started, I was still Assistant Secretary of State in Washington. The actual fighting started on the same week that we had our presidential election. Mm-hmm. So after the election, it was clear that our administration's time was very limited. It was an absolute shock. It was an absolute surprise. We had obviously been following the growing tensions between the Prosperity Party and the Abiy administration and TPLF and Mekele. But the actual spark that set off the war, no, it was absolutely unexpected.
So maybe can you, because there are a number of I would even layers of factors which we need to unpack, but within this cloud of mist, is there the last straw that broke the camel's back?
I don't know because again, historians are going to debate. There were two guns pointed at each other. Mm-hmm. The federal government and the Tigray administration, the TPLF. I think it's clear that the TPLF pulled the trigger first. Mm-hmm. The question is, was the federal government preparing for also a premeditated strike against Mekele? again, they can argue about it, but you get back to the point: who pulled the trigger first? There's no dispute that. But then you say, okay, it's obvious that the federal government was also prepared, because how quickly did the Eritrean forces come across the border? How quickly was the response? So it was a situation where you had a powder keg full of gunpowder, and it was only a matter of time of who was going to throw in the first match.
I can't agree more on that. It was a perfect security dilemma, I would say, where you are just waiting, because there are a number of turning points. In hindsight, everything is perfect, as you said. You are always right in hindsight.
You are, but here's the most tragic point of that whole thing. I've called that the most needless war in history, because when the war concluded, neither side had achieved its objectives. You were basically back to status quo ante, minus $27 billion worth of destruction. How many hundreds of thousands of people that had to flee, the thousands and thousands of casualties, thousands of women who were raped. It was unbelievable destruction for no purpose whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned about the American election. Now the election is coming up in I think in 2 months this time. Would you say it was a coincidence, by sheer coincidence, or a calculated move to pull the trigger on the eve of the U.S. election?
I have to tell you, non-Americans miss how important our elections are. Remember, I'm Hungarian, and we had the misfortune in Hungary of doing our revolution in October 1956, and there was a U.S. election. So America was really, they had the handcuffs on us to what they could and could not do to help us. And again, I think it was the circumstances had built up to the point at that time that the spark was lit, immaterial of what was going on anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. At least we could say that both parties have manipulated that loophole, since while the U.S. was busy with their own domestic affairs.
Yeah, and I don't think either side cared about the U.S. I know that many Ethiopians think that in America, every single decision maker thinks 24 hours a day about what's going on in Ethiopia. But I can tell you, in the scheme of things, if the president of the United States thinks about Ethiopia at all, it's not very often. And people have to understand that the United States of America is focused on every single country. And right now, the big crises of the day, as far as Washington is concerned, the major crises have nothing to do with Ethiopia. And I know my friends in Africa get frustrated by that, but I deal with reality, not with just saying nice things to please people.
No, that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in a way, we have to lower our expectations, because most of the people who do not know at least how diplomacy works, they think that the US are busy actually thinking about Ethiopia and plotting against Ethiopia. So we have to we have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
So now, because your explanation is actually moving us in a very seamless way, that what was the outcome of that senseless war? In a way, it is negative in so many ways, but let's focus on the implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. And everybody is interpreting some provisions, I would say, not holistically, of the Pretoria Agreement in the way that it fits them, by forgetting their obligation, because any legal agreement has both obligations and rights or privileges. So they are accusing each other of partial implementation or non-implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. And even yesterday, one of the splinter groups, the Getachew Redda's group, General Tzadkan Gabrtansai, was saying that abrogating or denouncing the Pretoria Agreement is a declaration of war. And then the other group are saying, no, we are not against Pretoria Agreement, we accept it, but we are just talking about the fruits of the Pretoria Agreement. And now even the TPLF is divided about the status of the Pretoria Agreement, and the federal government is is quite quiet about it for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And what is happening up there? And the Secretary of State is also coming to Ethiopia. He's already in Ethiopia. Ambassador Mike Hammer is in Ethiopia already, I think.
Yeah, our special envoy. You know, that's why I said
special envoy. Sorry, I said secretary. Yeah.
Poor Ambassador Mike. I cannot imagine a more difficult role in the world right now than what he has. You know, no matter what he does or what he says, he's going to be criticized bitterly. And, you know, people are going to say he's a traitor. He's, you know, out to do this. He's out to do that. It is an impossible job, but, you know, God bless him for his willingness to do it. He has been hanging in there longer than, you know, the previous envoys, I think, very quickly realized how difficult the job is. So here's the deal. You know, let's look at the Pretoria Agreement. The Pretoria Agreement had one immediate goal. And then there were a number of other goals. And as you go, you know, down the list, they become much more and more difficult, more complicated, more intricate. The immediate goal was to stop the suffering and to stop the fighting. And the agreement succeeded, thanks God to that. Now, all of these other, you know, conditions, the protection of civilians, humanitarian access, the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, confidence building, you know, all of those are in process, and they're extremely, extremely complicated. And, you know, something that is complicated is even more complicated in Ethiopia, because things that can be done in 3 months in most countries will take 3 years in Ethiopia. You know, I know that from my experience. So people have to look at this and say, no one is going to be 100% happy with this. Because if somebody was 100% happy, then that would mean that there were clear winners and clear losers. You know, the way that this whole thing has to end up is that the big winner needs to be Ethiopia. You know, in the larger sense, the nation of Ethiopia needs to be the winner, because tied up with the cessation of hostilities agreement, you also have the huge issues of transitional justice, and then you have the even bigger issue, I think, of national dialogue. So all of these things are tied up together. It's going to take an extremely large amount of work. And then you get into the, you know, included in that, you have the status of Walkaid or Western Tigray. I'm not going to use one word or the other, because then you automatically
contested territories.
Yeah,
let's say.
Yeah. So you know, people just need to understand that this is not going to be immediate. It's going to have to be worked on, but everybody should be united, and everybody should be praying for success, so that, you know, when all of these processes are completed, then you end up with an Ethiopia that is tranquil, at peace, and can move forward to achieve its destiny.
Staying on that point, can we say that, especially in some of the provisions, including the status of the contested territories, the way it was framed, could we say that the mediators used deliberately the so-called constructive ambiguity in a diplomatic term, the terminology which is, I think, attributed to the late Henry Kissinger? So that constructive ambiguity, deliberately using the language where both parties interpret in their own way, thinking that they both are the winner.
You had to absolutely have some ambiguity. You had to. You know, imagine if you were going to try to hammer out all of the details in specific terms when your immediate problem was stopping the fighting. You know, so part of it was very realistic, but part of it absolutely was aspirational. And all of the parties could sign it because all of the parties wanted those things to happen. I mean, everybody wants the protection of civilians. Everybody wants humanitarian access. You know, everybody would like to have a positive disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, and on and on and on. So of course there had to be some ambiguity in the terms.
Well, so let's put things together now for the sake of time. Now in the Amara region, there is a waging war. Just yesterday, I even just uploaded the interview with Mr. Iskander Nagga, one of the leader of the Fano movement. He says that there is no negotiation with this genocidal regime, and they want to change the regime or get away with the regime and bring about a structural change. And meaning the de-ethnicization of the political order, one of it. So the bottom line is that he's not going to negotiate, and he even hinted at the American intervention. He said he never talked to the Americans. He even actually reaffirmed exactly what you pointed out a few minutes ago. He said, well, the Americans have their own issues and they are not going to be in touch with that anytime soon. That is his language. And in Oromia, we have the release of, at least finally, after 4 years of illegal detention, the high-ranking officials from the OLF, which is a positive development there. So if we put together all these crises within Ethiopia, from Tigray all the way through Amhara to Oromia, unfortunately, the three major actors in the Ethiopian politics are in deep crisis now. Do you see any prospect for peace? If so, what would be that the all parties have to do in the new Ethiopian year? Because we'll have our new year in a couple of days.
Yeah, of course I see prospects for peace. I mean, let's look at them with Fano. It's kind of like what you mentioned, Henry Kissinger. You know, Henry Kissinger said, he complained when he said, when I want to talk to Europe, who do I call? And with Fano, it's not like the OLF. There is not a unified structure that, say, somebody can deal with. I mean, my understanding is that Fano is very, very fragmented. There is no clear leadership. Some of the groups have very different points of view as to what they want to do and what they don't want to do. Is there even one clear unified goal amongst all of the others besides they're absolutely unhappy with the current government? I've never seen anything about do they want an Amhara state that's separate and secedes from Ethiopia? It's very unclear. So it's difficult to have a negotiation when you're negotiating quote unquote partners, or the opposition party is all saying different things. But I'm an eternal optimist, and hopefully there's some way to engage with them. Again, with the OLF, I think it was a very positive sign that the government released the 7 detained folks the other day. So obviously there are things happening in the background. But you also have to remember, again, Ethiopians who complain, if the United States sneezes, then people will complain about it. The deal is that the United States of America has diplomatic, formal relations with the government of Ethiopia. The United States does not have relations with the TPLF or Fano or with the OLF. We have relations with Ethiopia. And it is not up, the United States can support internal stability. The United States can, support every way possible to bring some kind of a reconciliation and peace. But it's not up to the United States to send a delegation or to bring Fano or the OLF to Washington to quote unquote force some kind of an agreement. That has to be done in Ethiopia by Ethiopians. There's a thing that the United States is all powerful. The United States controls everything in the world. That's absolute bunk.
But do we have a culture of negotiation and peace then that in Ethiopia? I mean, within Ethiopian political history, one of the issues is that we do not. I wouldn't categorically say that, but we lack the culture of negotiation, deliberation, power sharing, and all sorts those sorts of issues. That's why we have mediators, and we look up to the U.S. and other partners.
Isn't that interesting? Now, you know as well as I do that within Ethiopia's domestic systems, there is the long tradition of the gemgema. where everybody has their say and they can meet for 6 weeks, discussion without end. And at the end of the day, there is absolute consensus and everyone walks out of there feeling like a winner. So, I disagree with that. I think that within Ethiopian culture and society, there is the makings for a phenomenal system to achieve reconciliation and, national consensus. It's going to take a lot of work. And it will take a lot of work by those people that are engaged, but it will also take a lot of work by, I hate to say it, the diaspora community, because in all of these problems, you have to ask yourself, has the diaspora been a help, or has it been a distraction, or has it been downright poisonous?
That's my question too, sir. That's my huge concern.
That's for you guys to decide. It's not up for outsiders to say, but you guys have to decide. I mean, I sometimes get a kick out of reading some of the things that Ethiopian intellectuals and elites who live in the United States write, and they go on and on and on and on, and it reminds me of the medieval disagreements in the Catholic Church about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's literally it's rearranging the furniture on the Titanic, and they're arguing over where to put the chair and where to put the chaise lounge, and they're arguing about arcane terminology and the historical antecedents of this Amharic word or that Amharic word. Give me a break. It is a time of national crises when the diaspora should be united in trying to promote peace, reconciliation, national unity.
Even just looking to the north, the diaspora, or particularly the women of Sudan, are stepping in. Yep. So we may take that as a role model where diaspora has to contribute a positive role in bringing the society together instead of fueling the ongoing conflict.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice if the men shut up and it was the women that spoke up?
I think the world would have been better. And I was expecting the 50-50 cabinet reshuffle in 2019, but it turned out to be not the case. But that said, there is one allegation that you already partly touched upon it. A particular and a peculiar U.S. bias against the Amhara people. Is there such a thing?
Absolutely
Why do the U.S. hate the Amhara people?
Absolutely not. Again, we get back to it's the self-delusion of so many Ethiopians that think that U.S. policymakers are sitting around all day discussing Ethiopia. If you ask some of the top people in the National Security Council, or if you ask the American president, I doubt if the American president would have a clue as to Amhara, Tigrinya, Oromo, anything like that. At the State Department, I can assure you that in the Bureau of African Affairs, the people who deal specifically with Ethiopia understand these issues, but there's absolutely, no sense whatsoever within the U.S. policymaking establishment that this is a pro or anti-Amhara-ish policy, or pro or anti-Tigrayan or Oromo or whatever. The U.S. looks at Ethiopia. And what's below that surface, very, very few people, understand, or I'll be honest with you, even care about.
That's perfect. Yeah. Let alone for the U.S. policy establishment. Even for me, I was 3-4 years ago in 2019, I was telling the professor of ethnic conflict management, he was saying that who are the Tigrayans, the Oromos, Amhara, and others. I said, I don't know. And he said, what? But we know who the Tigrayans are. And I said, good for you. and in a sense, as someone as an insider, I don't even know what they are fighting over, to be honest. Yeah. In most cases.
Yeah, that's what I was asking you. If you talk to the Fano leaders, and there are many, it's all very different. It's really too bad, and I wish the Ethiopian government every success in having successful negotiations over all of these ethnic strikes. But a few years ago, that the Ethiopian government had a successful negotiation and outcome with the Ogaden Liberation Front. And since then, the Ogaden historically was one of the most troubled regions of Ethiopia. And since then, I think it's been relatively quiet.
Yeah, probably that's actually one of the stable region throughout Ethiopia now. So that will take us actually to the eastern part of the country, and that will be the last section of our discussion. So now the Horn of Africa it has never been new to conflict, crisis, and it has always been busy. And now it has become partly a theater of chaos, I would say, for both the superpower competition and even emerging and middle power, ranging from the Middle East, such as Qatar, even Turkey, the UAE, and others. And what is very concerning these days is the possibility of an outright war breaking out between Ethiopia and Somalia, or even a proxy war, whether we are going to see a Ukraine of the Horn of Africa. In a sense, Somalia dragging all the big powers, were following particularly Egypt's involvement a couple of weeks ago. So based on your experience, first of all, do you see any looming conflict or war breaking out in the Horn of Africa, particularly between Ethiopia and Somalia? Let's begin with that.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, let's look at the situation in Somalia. The Somali regime cannot defeat al-Shabaab. The first day I was on the job as assistant secretary, I brought in my Somali people, my Somali experts, and I said, tell me, how many fighters are in the Somali National Army? They gave me a number. How many fighters are in the federal member state militias? They gave me a number. How many fighters are in al-Shabaab? They gave me a number. And I couldn't believe it. I said, this war should be over in one day, given the numbers. But the Somalia cannot defeat al-Shabaab by itself. It looks like it can't even defeat it, with international help. But how can anybody think that Somalia is going to war against Ethiopia when it cannot even defeat its own, internal extremist enemies? I mean, Ethiopians have been in Somalia helping the Somali government. So while Somalia is throwing what I call a snit fit against Ethiopia, they're Ethiopian soldiers who are giving their lives to protect that very regime. It is beyond ridiculous. If Somalia spent its energy and time on trying to create a stable and prosperous state instead of worrying about what other people are doing, then we would be so far ahead. But instead, it uses somewhat the tactics that Egypt uses with the GERD. It's trying to look for outside, forces and outside powers to help its case. It is pathetic. It is absolutely pathetic.
So let's dive deep into the rationales behind for Somalia's growing securitization or overreactions. Right? There must be some reasons. Can we blame the memorandum of understanding for everything which is unfolding? Because most people are saying now you have opened the floodgate and you laid your bed. You made your bed. You have to lay on it, kind of thing. Blaming everything to the Ethiopian government for signing the memorandum of understanding, act of aggression, and provoking Somalia and all regional actors. So can we blame Ethiopia or the memorandum of understanding for all the crisis we are seeing?
Well, let's talk some fundamentals. First of all, Ethiopia has absolutely every right to negotiate for a port. Ethiopia is the largest, most populous landlocked country on earth. So it absolutely has rights to a port. Number two, Somaliland is much more of a de facto functioning state than Somalia. And, everybody knows that. Everybody pretends that it's a quote unquote breakaway region of Somalia, but it's not. It's a functioning state. It's a real country. And, because of that, Somalia is feeling very, unconfident about its own role. And So there are a lot of forces underneath there. It's the port deal, I think, was just, again, it was, as we say, the straw that breaks the camel's back. It was that last kind of act that Somalia can focus on over its unhappiness. I mean, the Somali people deserve so much better than the governments that they've had to put up with. Let's start with that. When is Somalia actually going to have a one-person, one-vote election, direct election? Instead of, when is Somalia going to figure out how to not have its hand out to the international community for billions and billions of dollars every single year? When will Somalia be able to stand on its own 2 feet? Instead of, holding its breath because 2 of its neighbors dared to make an agreement, which is in both of those countries' interest.
But some people allege that the memorandum of understanding is against the territorial integrity of Somalia. So what is your answer to that?
Well, yeah. What are we talking about? Territorial integrity of Somalia? Are we talking about Greater Somalia? All of the stars in the Somali flag? Does that include the Ogaden, parts of northern Kenya? Somaliland is a functioning de facto state that the Somaliland people decided on. And, that's how it goes. My own native country of Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory after World War I. People were very unhappy about it. People are still unhappy about it, but that's what happened.
Yeah. So what business, now let's move to the new actor. What business does Egypt has in Somalia, and in what ways Ethiopia's national interest, is affected by the involvement of the Egyptians in Somalia? And do you believe that the way Ethiopia reacted was justified?
Well, I think, you have these 2 countries that have grievances against Ethiopia, Egypt because of the GERD, Somalia because of the potential port deal with Somaliland. So, what do they say, that the enemy, that's the one thing that the 2 of them have in common, that they're very unhappy with Ethiopia. So, that's what they're going to do. And Ethiopia, it's like having 2 mosquitoes, flying around your face. Ethiopia, I think, is going to do what the Ethiopians believe is in their national interest, and they're not going to let all of this noise bother them very much.
Great. And then, so now with the involvement of Egypt and the other actors, to what extent we can see the invisible hands of the great powers in here, and the great powers or middle powers or emerging powers? Is it just only the making of Somalia, or Somalia is being somehow, both Somalia and Ethiopia are being used as a pawn?
I think to a certain extent, they are being used as chess pieces. I think, first of all, you have to look at the African Union. The African Union has some states in it that are very concerned with recognition for Somaliland because of what that would mean for their own internal struggles. I mean, you have Cameroon with Ambazonia. You have still the Biafrans in Nigeria, being somewhat unhappy. So you have countries like that. So the African Union would just like to maintain the status quo. So they are there. And then there are other countries that are very interested in various things. Look at Turkey and Somalia's potential oil reserves both offshore and onshore. You have the United Arab Emirates that has interests, very keen interests in the Horn of Africa region. And then others, Djibouti, of course, with this, I had to laugh with this recent offer by Djibouti, to give Ethiopia a port,
which is punching over its weight.
When people ask me about Djibouti, I say, think about a hotel, and the president of Djibouti is like the hotel keeper that has to keep all of the guests very happy. That's why you have the Chinese military base, the U.S. military base. I think France is there, Italy is there. Everybody's there. So.
Except its neighbor, Ethiopia. Everyone is welcome to establish their own base, military base.
Although the president speaks Amharic,
Not only Amharic, he's from my own city. He has his family, a farmland. He has a house around the outskirts of Redwa. Anyways, he's one of our own.
Yeah. So.
And then finally, because I have to keep.
We have to finish in 3 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. So, do you see any diplomatic peace in the Horn of Africa in general, and any intervention in this ongoing conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia? Do you see any possibility of diplomatic intervention, and what could that be?
Yeah, I think there's always a possibility, but it's going to take some time. Did Ethiopia and Somaliland announce their port deal the best way possible? Probably not. It could have been done a lot more quietly. So again, history is 100% correct when you look back. So, as we say, you have to put the genie back in the bottle somehow, and it will take a lot of work. But it's the good news here is there is not an immediate threat of an outbreak of hostilities. This is going to be going very quietly. The Somalis, of course, are going to look for allies. Ethiopia, I know, is going to feel at times that they are alone, as does Somaliland. But at the end of the day, I predict everything will quiet down, because the Horn of Africa is such a critically important world region. I mean, you can make a list of 20 very, very substantive points as to why it's so important. So people really have to care about what happens in the Horn of Africa, all the way from Sudan, South Sudan, across to all of the countries.
Thank you very much, sir. It has been a roller coaster ride. It's always a pleasure to be with you. This is now going to be the end of our conversation. This is the time we had for today, but I hope that you will come back anytime soon, and feel free to come back. The Buffet of Ideas podcast is your home from now onward. I thank you very much for coming with a very short notice.
Thank you very, very much. It was great, and good luck. Bye-bye.
And welcome Addis Amet, and Happy New Year, Ethiopia.
And God bless Ethiopia.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a good day. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was our Ethiopia Today podcast, special podcast. Today we had a guest, a very special guest who is familiar with the politics of the Horn of Africa and deeply engaged with the inside out of the Ethiopian politics, Ambassador Tibor Nagy. We discussed the hydropolitics, the dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and the fragile peace in Ethiopia and how to sustain it, and the looming crisis in the Horn of Africa by zooming in on the diplomatic standoff between Somalia and Ethiopia. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your time. And goodbye. That's it from us for today.